right, now let's head to the global space. Will has a very short time today because we had we had
actually send my tariff. I'll make sure Donald Trump.
Have you heard that there's an exemption now?
No, please. There's no exemption for you. I'm sending it. And you know, one of the top of the conversations or the topics that is really burning is the EU. The EU is
the EU and the US now. We're out from China and US.
So the EU negotiates trade policy for 27 nations, and that's a huge responsibility. About 450 million people in that region, in that bloc, and so they have a responsibility, and they feel they cannot be strong-armed into any bad agreement with Trump. So let's just have that conversation with Adrian Terzic today. So the European Union, as I mentioned, is exploring a broader set of possible countermeasures against the United States as prospects for an acceptable trade agreement with Washington is fading, and that's according to EU diplomats, with a hard line on tariffs from Washington. And the European Central Bank is meeting this week. Tensions are rising across both sides of the Atlantic. Today we're joined by Adrian Terzic, a senior country risk analyst for Europe at Fitch Solutions. He's going to unpack what's brewing this trade showdown and what it means for the EU economies and markets. Good morning, Terzic. It's good to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So tariff pressure, let's just talk about that. It's a tariff alert. Trump is threatening 30% duties on EU imports from August the 1st. How are Brussels and EU leaders diplomatically managing the ticking clock here?
So there's been I think that everyone is working very hard to get to a deal by August 1st. We've had signs from both sides that things are getting better. Howard Lutnick, the US Commerce Secretary, this week has sort of expressed optimism that a deal is around the corner. But when we look on the EU side, EU's trade chief, Maroš Šefčovič, has really struggled to find a breakthrough in what they want to see in terms of a 0-for-0 tariff deal. And so they were offered all sorts of things from buying more US energy goods, oil and gas, or buying US semiconductors. But what really appears to be the sticking point is the EU's VAT and digital regulations.
Your thought there. We just want to sign on very quickly. Ini, over to you.
So we have an event going on. That's for our DSTV viewers. The Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. They have an event, West African Refined Fuel Market, Pathway to Regional Reference Market. And that's happening in Abuja. That's for our DSTV viewers. For our other viewers, you're still here on Business Morning. Will.
Thank you so much, Ini. So, Terzic, could you just go on with what you were saying? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, of course. So, yeah, the VAT and digital regulations are a big thing. And so I think that's where the EU is going to struggle to find a compromise with the US. And so I think in the recent weeks, both sides have been starting to realize that things are getting tight and are becoming a lot more difficult. And so we've seen signs that EU officials are starting to prepare for maybe some sort of contingency measures or things that could go if there is no deal by August the 1st.
Definitely, that's what you just mentioned, and the EU is prepping retaliatory tariffs up to, say, 72 billion euros, and we see that new anti-coercion instrument they're talking about. Well, how serious are they about using it?
So I do think the EU is going to have to be very careful with introducing any significant retaliations, such as the anti-coercion instrument. We don't really have that much news on what exactly it is and where it's going to be targeting. But I think that if they do introduce it, it's something I would be very worried about. And so I think the reasons they're going to be very careful is it's not least just because it's the last thing they want to do is start a tit-for-tat escalation in tariffs with the US. We saw that with them in China this year. Tariffs went up to over 100% on both sides, and that would really grind things to a halt for the European economy. And I think that a big challenge that Europe has been facing has been these high cost pressures, which the domestic industry really has struggled to bring down since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And so adding on top of this, this additional retaliatory tariff, I think the European economy is really going to struggle to find a foothold because ultimately it's the consumer that pays the tax burden in the end when it comes to tariffs.
We do know that about 1/5 of European goods exports heads to the US, and we're seeing that dollar to euro, the dollar weakening against the euro, and the dollar is really Euro is under pressure still. Is the ECB looking at their meeting today, assessing what's likely going to come out of that? Are they likely to hold fire on interest rates? Are they likely to put a hold or cut rates? What do you think?
So I do think that they will hold off this week. You're right, the euro has been somewhat rocky in recent weeks because of the trade talks, but I think that it's important to note the euro is still over 10% up on the dollar in the year. So broadly, when we take things and look at the bigger picture, I think on the currency side, the euro is in a position which is more favorable in the argument for more interest rate cuts by the ECB because just how it reduces the cost for imported goods. But for me, the main reason why the ECB will hold off is just because of how high the uncertainty is around the trade negotiations that are happening in the current week and the next week, and just sort of how big the stakes are for the Eurozone economy with how these negotiations go. So I think that... Go ahead.
No, just go ahead. Just finish your thought.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, a lot is going to be decided by the deal struck between Washington and Brussels. And so the ECB really is going to wait and see until we have a clear idea of where we are going to go with tariffs before they make any sort of move, in my opinion.
Just quick one, in terms of forward guidance, if this 30% tariff, according to analysts, come into effect, what kind of knock-on effect will it have? How might it influence the ECB's forward guidance for, say, the growth in the EU zone?
A 30% tariff would be very much the worst case for the ECB. They released some scenarios in the previous meetings, with their base case being a very similar situation to how we have now. And so 30% would be a very big shift in what they're looking at for the economy and for where they will likely guide interest rates to be. And so I think that overall, another 30% is going to shave off about maybe another 0.7 percentage points off of Eurozone growth over the next 18 months. And that is a big deal when it comes to demand side inflationary pressures and what the ECB is looking at. And so I think the ECB's forward guidance in this meeting is going to be very cautious because they're going to be keeping an eye on how the trade talks go, but they're not really going to commit to anything concrete until we have a better idea of how the economic outlook is going to look going forward, with much of that being decided after August the 1st.
Definitely, we'll keep an eye on that and know that you at Fitch Solutions will also be watching. Thank you so much, Adrian Terzic, Senior Country Risk Analyst for Europe at Fitch Solutions. Thank you for joining us on Business Morning.